A reading from the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verses 1 through 11. Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through 11. And God spoke all these words: I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. The word of the Lord.
So we are looking at the Ten Commandments because we've been tracking through the history of the Israelites going through the wilderness after the Lord saves them out of the hand of Pharaoh from slavery. And over the past several weeks, we've been looking at each and every one of the 10 commandments, and we've been sort of saying that this is God's way of loving the Israelites. This is the law of love that he's giving to them, and it's essentially to teach them how it is that now, as free people, they are to relate to God by loving him well, and to relate to others by loving others. And that is the path to what we said, to be truly human. A law of love, a guideline that God gives to live the life that we were always meant to live, for us to best flourish. And we're looking at those 10 commandments because as we look out into the world today, we can often see that we are struggling to flourish. Here's a graphic that I want to show that helps us to see why it is that we often struggle to flourish. There was this Gallup poll that was done over several years that tracked people's sleep and the rising of stress. And so the graph on the right actually shows that people, more and more people since 2013 are saying, I need more sleep. I'm not getting enough sleep. And then very much correlated on the graph on the left shows that directly corresponds to the level of stress that people are experiencing today. This shows we are more stressed than ever, and we are equally not able to rest from that stress. And what that creates, and maybe you're experiencing that right now too, it can create this vicious cycle that leads us to live a miserable kind of a life, a spiraling life. And so what's happening now today in culture is that people are responding to that. And people are becoming way more health conscious, and folks are especially highlighting the need for sleep. Right? And so, I don't know if you watch any of the self-help things or on YouTube, people talk about how sleep now is the ultimate hack, the ultimate health hack, like as if that was brand new news to people, right? That if you sleep, that's actually what you need in order to best flourish. But our question today, as we look at the fourth commandment, is physical rest all we really need for us to best flourish? Is that it? And we're going to look today at the fourth commandment to practice this Sabbath day, this Sabbath rest, because the Bible actually knows what you need is much more than just 8 hours of sleep or REM or core sleep, however you're tracking it. You need much more than just physical rest. What you need is a deep spiritual rest for your heart that no other kind of rest could possibly give to you. That's what we need, and that's what the Sabbath rest can actually give to us. Otherwise, what we tend to experience is that we kind of feel like an idling car whose engine is always on, but you're just parked in the driveway. You're never going anywhere. And a lot of us struggle to turn that off to actually get the kind of rest, whether we're resting in place or not. And that is what the Sabbath rest command is actually meant to give to us. And that is why I think, as we look at the different commandments, this is one of those commands that I think we don't understand well, But it's one of those commands that I think we need most today because we are bad. We are bad at resting. And therefore, we're always running on the fumes of stress that fill our lives. And we're going to see today that God can actually give us the deep kind of rest that's critical for our flourishing. But in order for us to understand how it is that we get that, we actually have to start by asking, what is our relationship to work? Because the reason why most of us are really bad at resting is because we also have a very distorted view of work. So I'm going to start there. You see, here in New York City, we have a very complicated relationship with work, right? Most of you are probably here in this city for your work, and that says a lot about what the narrative of this city is. But one of the main cultural narratives that we press upon you, especially right when you get here, is that this is a hustle culture, that you've got to keep up. And overworking is the norm here, right? And so when you talk to people who are not from here, and they're just like, oh yeah, I just work, 30, 35 hours a week, and you kind of look down on them because you're like, what? What do you do with the rest of your time? Because here in the city, to be busy and to work a lot actually means that you're important. It says something about you when you have to work a lot. And a hallmark of living here in the city is that we tend to assign values to people based on what they've accomplished, what they do, and what their resume shows. And if you come from an immigrant background like me, hard work and working hard sort of to the bone really gets valorized. It gets praised even more. Some of you might know this, but I worked in finance before I came into ministry. And when I was an investment banker, I would be working 90 hours a week. And I remember saying that like it was a badge of honor. And then some people would actually rightly say, oh, you're crazy. But then when I would tell my parents, my Asian parents this, what would they say? Oh, you're doing such a good job. Because particularly in immigrant cultures and in New York City, working hard is the way that you get formed a valuable identity. Maybe you feel that today, and that's sort of the narrative that we often live in. But the problem with that, of course, is that it pits work against rest. Work comes at the cost of rest, right? And therefore, we can start to live out this narrative that rest is actually for the weak, that you're not supposed to be resting. Or you start to think, well, I'm going to rest when I die after I've accomplished everything that I want to accomplish. And of course, a lot of us work really hard because we think that if we rest, we're going to be falling behind. And therefore, we're always after this elusive kind of rest that the city never gives to us. So we have this very big culture of overworking and hustle culture. But then, on the flip side, younger people especially today, have swung to the other end of the cycle. And now people are living into what people call quiet quitting. Maybe some of you are quiet quitters. But quiet quitting is this new movement that essentially says, why should I work myself to the bone? What I'm going to do is I'm going to work the bare minimum at work. And once 5 p.m. hits, I'm going to leave. I'm going to log off, and I can't be reached. It's a brand new sort of movement that says, work doesn't care that much about me, so why should I care so much about it? I'm not getting the kind of recognition that I want. All it is that I'm just suffering. And people have sort of caught on to the idea that corporations just want you to work so much, and this is sort of pushing against that narrative by people, particularly younger people, quiet quitting. And so quiet quitters are very good at setting boundaries and saying, I'm off the clock, please don't get in touch with me. Now what that does, though, oftentimes, it makes you less enthusiastic at work. It makes you less emotionally involved at work. And what that leads to oftentimes is you hating work, not liking going into it. It's a dreadful thing to do. And it's been also linked with poor performance and a lot of complaining at work. So some of you work with quiet quitters and they frustrate you because they are not great coworkers, right? But that similarly is still pitting work against rest. It's saying, you know what, work is not going to be my everything. And so instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to withdraw myself and I'm going to care less about my work so that I can protect my rest and do what I actually want to do. And here's what I want us to see. That both of those approaches, and maybe you're in one camp or the other or in some gradation of the two, both of those approaches, they miss the mark. Right? One of them says that my value is in my work, and the other one basically says, well, no, my value is in my rest. And it always comes at the cost of the other. Because no matter which camp you're in, you either end up having a very low view of rest or you have a low view of work. And that's not what we see in the Bible. The Bible actually gives us a comprehensive view of both work and rest that this fourth commandment that was just read helps us to see. Look with me starting in verse 8. It says, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work." Now here's the first thing I want us to notice, and you can keep this up here, Joan. The first thing I want us to notice is that inherent in the command to rest is what? The assumption that you work. And just remember this, the giving of the law was given to former slaves who was freed from Israel under the hand of Pharaoh. And of course, they were freed for now a life with God to experience the freedom of life that God was going to give to them. But this was not meant that they were going to now be freed for a life of leisure, as if these former slaves were going to be freed by God through the Red Sea to go straight to the beach to just be sipping margaritas. As great as that sounds for us, that's not the life that God is saving Israel for. But instead, remember, God is giving them a vision for all of life that helps them to most flourish. And with this assumption of work, God is essentially telling Israel and to us that work is in your nature. That because you're created by a working God, a God who created the heavens and the earth, that you and I are too created to also work. And therefore, the Bible's view is very different. The Bible's view is actually that work is a way that you worship God, that you give of your gifts, that work is not a necessary evil that you're trying to escape so that you can live the life of freedom that you're really looking for. In this, it's very important for us to see that as former slaves, this was really important for them to understand because they would have had a very warped view of what work is. And God says, 6 days you shall labor. You would think, well, you've brought us to be free. I feel like it should be 6 days of rest. Let me just work one day. That's not it, because you're made to work. But the main command here that we see is actually to cease from your work. Because 6 days you are to labor, and then look what it says. But the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. Now, the word Sabbath is the Hebrew word just meaning to cease or to stop. And so God is actually commanding here that you are to rest. So he's saying, yes, work is important, but it is equally important that you know how to rest, that you know how to stop. And you might be wondering, why in the world is this a part of the 10 Commandments? Why is ceasing to stop work? Why is that so important as to make it into the list of the 10 things that you should do in order to live a most flourishing life? Does it belong on the list? And the answer here that we're going to see is yes. Because again, the 10 Commandments, they're given to us to most flourish and to be truly human. And that's sort of the reasoning of the law that's given. And in order to truly flourish, or here's another way to say it, if you know anyone or if you have been overworked to the bone, if you have experienced what burnout is like, you know that that is not flourishing. That is not what it means to be human. God is actually saying that you're not meant to live as if only your output matters, because that's not what it means to be human. That's what it means to be a machine. Here's what Tim Keller says about that. He says, do you realize the incredible nature of what it means that this fourth commandment is a part of the 10 Commandments? He says this: a society that encourages overwork is as brutalizing, as depersonalizing, and as dehumanizing as a society that encourages stealing, adultery, and killing. Is in the same list. So we are commanded to rest because without it, we will be barreling toward a view of ourselves and others that only sees people on the basis of what we produce or what we have achieved. And that is a miserable life. That is a miserable life. That is not the life that we're meant to live. That's not the way that we're meant to view ourselves nor the people around us. That is not the kind of society or the culture that we are meant to live in. We're not meant to be running cars that don't know how to actually shut off. So he commands rest. But here's the thing. It's not just any kind of rest. It's not just physical rest or sleeping. It is a Sabbath rest. And a Sabbath rest is a recentering of your life around God. not around yourself. Here's what Pete Scazzero says about what a weekly Sabbath is. He says it is a weekly 24-hour period in which you cease all work and you rest. You delight in God's gifts and you enjoy life with Him, which is to say you stop work, you enjoy rest, you practice delight, and you contemplate God. And that might be a very new concept for you who've heard of what the Sabbath is or sort of understood what Sabbath is, just equating it to going to church on Sunday. And if that's your view, which many of us probably grew up thinking, you're going to completely miss the bigger why and the reason as to why God gives this. And you'll never get the kind of Sabbath rest that's offered to us. We actually preached on this not that long ago, back in July, about what the Sabbath is, but I want to reiterate for us that there are two particular places in the Old Testament where this command is given. First in Exodus in our passage, and then secondly in Deuteronomy. And each of those actually shows to us the greater why, as to why Sabbath rest is commanded. First in Exodus, starting in verse 11 in our passage, says this. You have to cease from work, right? And because he says, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. See, in Exodus, the command to rest is grounded in creation. Just as God rested on the seventh day after he created the entire world, we too, as his image bearers, are called to do the exact same thing. And when we do, it honors the divine in us, because the rest that we take reminds us that we were created by God to be human and not animals or machines. So when we rest as God rested, it honors the divine in us and helps us to remind us that we are human beings. But when we do that, it also, equally importantly, reminds us that we are also not God. Because the interesting thing here is that as we imitate God, we paradoxically are reminded that we are not like him in many, many ways. You see, work is one of those things that can really make us feel like God. Right? We all do incredible things in our work, whether you think it or not. The fact that we create, the fact that we produce, the fact that culture is created within us. Look around at the neighborhood that we live in. That's all of a nature and function of the work that people have produced. We can do incredible things, making the invisible visible, making the impossible possible. But therefore, equally, when we work in this kind of a way, we can start to take on the place of God, and we start to think, I'm very, very important. And if I cease working, the world will cease existing. You know people like that? Maybe you're like that. That if you feel like you pull away, that everything is just going to fall in on itself. That the world won't be able to continue on without you working. And here's the thing. At first, of course, that kind of work makes us feel very valuable and very, very important. And that's why we are prone to do it. But overworking will always betray our created natures. Because here's a secret I'm going to let you in on. The work never stops. And you are made to stop. And when there is a collision course between the two, what will happen is that you will come up against your boundaries and work will always win. It will never be enough. And when you try to win against work, that's the kind of thing that leads to burnout and overworking and complete exhaustion. Work will always require more from us than we could possibly give to it. And so when we cease to work, we are setting limits around ourselves and recognizing, just truthfully, that we are not infinite beings. That we are not at the center of the universe, that we are not indestructible forces, but instead that we are created by God, made in his image, to be human, not machines. And as we do, we recognize the frailty that we are made with, that we are jars of clay that are meant to be handled with care, that we are to be mended and refreshed, not always working. And some of us don't know what that feels like, because we're constantly over-functioning and therefore leading to burnout. It's betraying your created nature. And so that's the first thing that the Exodus is telling us, That the reason why you are to rest is because it helps you to understand your created nature. But then secondly, the second grounds, the second time the command is given is in the book of Deuteronomy. And this time in the book of Deuteronomy, it grounds Sabbath rest in our liberation. Here's Deuteronomy chapter 5. He says, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. And then a little bit later says, remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. The command is being connected directly to the liberation and redemption of Israel from slavery. This has been a main theme that we've been tracking through in the entire book of Exodus as we've been preaching through it. But this time, God commands this rest because he says, you were once slaves, remember, under a different master who offered no choice whether you could work or whether you could rest. The choice was always made for you because you were slaves who served Pharaoh. And in fact, you had to work in order for Pharaoh to rest. And so Pharaoh put all these taskmasters around you to crack the whip so that the moment that you slacked in your work or the moment that you tried to cease or you slowed down in your work, they would remind you that you were made to be there in order to work. They were there to remind you that you are a slave and you are not free to rest, that you have to keep working. But God says, but remember, I brought you out of that former condition. You are no longer slaves. I've saved you from those taskmasters that tell you to be productive or else. And therefore, when you and I can't stop working, it is this inner voice in our heads that is cracking the whip. And that's when you know that work has actually become your master. That you are now a slave to the consequences of not being able to work. And so if the Exodus narrative is teaching us to move away from saying, I'm too important, the Deuteronomy text is teaching us to stop us from saying, it is too important. Because if I stop, the consequences will be too great for me. And so resting, God says, in a Sabbath way, is a direct stand against the masters of this world that tell us to serve productivity and accomplishment and resumes. It's this defiant act of worship and an allegiance to the God who invites us to rest, a very different master, one that says, you can only rest only after I've told you that you've done enough. And so therefore rest under Pharaoh and under work is only a reward for finishing our work. And God actually says, I give you rest not as a reward, but as a gift. He says, you are mine. There is nothing that you can do to make you love you any more or any less. You are worthy to be in relationship with me. That will never go away, no matter how much or how little you produce in any given day. So you can stop. You can delight. You can play. All of that as an act of worship and devotion to me, your new master. And so Sabbath rest is this incredible declaration of your freedom. It is a revolutionary act of faith that helps you now live into a very different story about who you are. And that story is grounded, of course, in who God is as he calls you to be like him in creation, but also not only who he is, but what he has done as you remember and rehearse his redemption over your life. It is a new story over your life. And here's the thing, as Israel kept the Sabbath holy, it was always meant to point them to where this story was headed. See, this was a way for so remember, it's been just a couple of months since Israel is brought out from the land of Pharaoh, and they're now at Mount Sinai, and they're given the law, and God is saying, this is how you relate to me. And in it, he says, you have to take a weekly break, because as you do that, I'm preparing you for your true freedom that's going to be found in the promised land that is to come. Because remember, God was taking them to the land of Canaan, the land flowing with milk and honey, the place that the slaves felt like, this is the true land of rest that we have been waiting for. We are journeying to that future land, and we can't wait for that. The future land where there will be complete and true rest, physical rest, emotional rest, spiritual rest, but also social and communal rest. That was the story of where they were headed. And that is why in verse 10 in our passage we read this. that on that day, on that Sabbath day, you should not do any work, neither you, nor your son or your daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. And the reason for that is this, is that this Sabbath rest was pointing you as well as the entire community forward to the future day when true rest was going to be had for everyone, not just you, for everyone. And it was a kind of rest that God rests on the seventh day in the book of Genesis, when he, after his creating of the world, when everything is right and good and at peace, he stands back and he rests because he says, it is good. Everything is right. Things are in a settled state. That is the kind of rest that is promised to Israel in the land of Canaan. And that's the kind of rest that our hearts are all looking for and yearning for. And so as they practiced it, they were rehearsing the future rest that was to come, the true rest that their hearts desired. But do you think they got that rest when they eventually got to the land of Canaan? If you read on a little bit further, you know that the answer there is no. These former slaves finally get to the promised land, the place of rest, but they don't actually get the kind of rest that they're looking for because they rebel against God. They don't remain in a relationship with him. And so the rest that they were meant to find was always supposed to be grounded in who God is and what he had done for them. That is to say, that rest was supposed to be grounded in a relationship with him. And that's the very thing that Israel always has rejected. And so you see that even in the land of Canaan, there is conflict, there is strife, there isn't peace. And so Israel is always still looking for a kind of future hope and a kind of future rest that they are looking for, that they've been wanting for. And they miss out on it because they never fully got that what God was really offering to them was himself and not a particular place. That it was nothing inherent in the land of Canaan that was going to give them rest. It was the fact that they could be in relationship with him and knowing who he is and what he has done for them. And so Israel struggles to find that rest. But what about for us? How do we enter into this kind of a rest? Is this offered to us? And friends, you got to see that the shadow of the hope that Israel had in looking to who God was and what he had done for them, the shadow and what God had done through the Exodus narrative in saving Israel from the hand of Pharaoh, is ultimately and fully fulfilled in who? Jesus Christ, who has gone to greater lengths in order to show his full redemptive love to us, by not just saving us from the hand of Pharaoh, but by giving his entire life for our sake, the ultimate saving act for us, proving to us once and for all who he is and what he has done for us. And as we look to what Christ has done, it is meant to give us a kind of rest that nothing in this world could possibly give to us. And it's a reminder that true rest is only found in relationship to this God through Jesus. Because you see, friends, it's only as you see what Christ has done for you that he can now say to our wrestling, stressed out hearts to finally say, friend, you can actually trust me and let go and actually rest. Because for those of us who start to think, well, I can't rest because I'm too important, things are going to fall apart. He says, no, you're not. In fact, the reason why you are anxious and restless is because you keep on trying to take my place. You keep on trying to control the future and control everything around you. That is why you're like a car idling in the parking lot. And that's the very thing that's causing you to be disrupted in your relationship with me. No, it is not I am too important. You have to see that you are not. And yet the most important person in the universe has come to lay down his life and to do a good work for you. To die the death that you should have died for us playing God, that leads to our anxious and restless hearts. I'm going to die that death for you, the death of burnout, in order to bring you into my fold. And for those of us who say, well, it's too important, the work's got to get done, Jesus says to us, and only Jesus alone says to us, no. The really important work that needs to get done, you cannot do. And that is in reconciling your relationship with the God that can give you rest. And that too I've come to do on your behalf. by giving you the life that you didn't deserve, my life, my relationship with the Father that is perfect. I give that to you when I die for you on the cross. And he says on the cross, it is finished. The work is finished. You know what he's saying there? He's saying not only is the work of your salvation, your relationship brought back through what I've done for you, but that is the moment that our future hope, our eternal glory is also ensured. That we can now look to what Jesus has done on the cross and know that we can enter into a heavenly rest, an eternal rest with him, because he has done a work that we could never do ourselves. That is why it's only through Jesus Christ that all of our weary hearts can receive the rest that we need for this life. That we don't have to keep striving, trying to get our validation or trying to get a sense of rest from anything else. Because Christ has done that work for you. Won't you enter into it? Aren't you tired of trying to live on your own? That's why Jesus says to us, come to me, all who are weary and burdened and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. That offer is open to every single one of us who look to him.